3 gunshots shattered the silence of an April night in Kenya. When police arrived, they found a man strapped in his driver's seat, executed at point-blank range. 20 kilometers away, his wife walked into a police station claiming carjackers attacked them. But her story had one fatal flaw. She bypassed the police station just 500 meters from the murder scene. This is the story of Sheila Kibinge, a U.S.-based nurse, a university lecturer, and a woman who would be sentenced to death for a murder she claims she never committed. April 14, 2014, Gitaru Village, Kikuyu, Kiambu County, Kenya. At 3 a.m., residents were jolted awake by an explosion, followed by 2 distinct gunshots that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. A neighbor immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at a residential compound near an apartment complex called Jack's Apartments. What they found would launch one of Kenya's most controversial murder investigations. A maroon Toyota RAV4 had veered off the road and crashed into a perimeter gate. The left rear door was wide open, and inside the driver's seat, strapped in with his seatbelt, was the body of 5-year-old Leonard Kibinge Kiruri. Blood splattered every surface inside the vehicle. Leonard had been shot 3 times, once in the back of his head, once in the back of his neck, and once in the left side of his chest. The violence was so extreme that investigators initially theorized multiple attackers were involved. But the crime scene told a disturbing story. The house was surrounded by barbed wire fencing. There were no signs of forced entry. The compound's alarm system had been disabled, yet nothing was stolen from the car. Most puzzling of all, investigators found 3 live bullets, 1 spent cartridge, and a mysterious black headscarf at the scene. The evidence pointed to a chilling conclusion. Leonard Kibinge had been murdered by someone he knew. Someone who had access to his home. Someone who sat close enough to execute him at point-blank range. As crime scene investigators processed the murder site, detectives tried desperately to contact Leonard's wife, Sheila, to inform her that her husband was dead, but her phone was switched off. They had no idea that at that very moment, 20 kilometers away, Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge was walking into a police station in Nairobi with a story that would change everything. At 3:30 a.m., a woman entered the Central Police Station in downtown Nairobi, a full 20 kilometers from where Leonard lay dead in his crashed vehicle. She wore a long checked dress and appeared terrified. She told the duty officer that she and her husband had been carjacked while driving home. The officer recorded her statement in the occurrence book and referred her back to Kikuyu Police Station for further action. The woman had no visible injuries. She appeared calm and collected. Her name was Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge, and she would soon become the prime suspect in one of Kenya's most debated murder cases. To understand what happened that night, we need to understand who Sheila Kibinge was. On the surface, she appeared to be living the American dream. In Maplewood, New Jersey, Sheila worked as a registered nurse and an elementary school teacher. She was pursuing her Ph.D. and teaching at a university. Those who knew her described her as educated, accomplished, and fiercely ambitious. She held multiple teaching certificates in elementary school education, physical science, and even as a supervisor. But Sheila lived a divided life. While she built her career in America, her husband Leonard remained in Kenya managing their properties and investments. They had 2 children together, but their marriage was conducted across 2 continents, separated by over 7,000 miles. By early 2014, cracks had begun to show in their intercontinental marriage. The couple owned several properties together, including valuable apartment flats in Mombasa, Kenya's coastal city. These properties generated rental income that would become the center of a bitter dispute. In February 2014, just 2 months before Leonard's death, Sheila and Leonard received a demand letter from Kenya Housing Finance regarding one of their Mombasa properties. Leonard had sold the property, but there was a problem. There were disputes about the actual amount of money realized from the sale. Who received the money? Where had it gone? These questions would later form the prosecution's theory of motive that Sheila murdered Leonard over a property dispute worth enough to kill for. So how did Sheila Kibinge travel 20 kilometers from the murder scene in Gitaru to Central Police Station in Nairobi? And why did she bypass Kikuyu Police Station, which was only 500 meters away? The answer would come from 2 taxi drivers whose testimonies would prove crucial to the case. At approximately 3 a.m., the first taxi driver was traveling from Gitaru area toward Kikuyu town when he spotted something unusual. A brown-skinned woman walking alone on a dangerous road in the middle of the night. She was dressed in trousers and a top. The driver stopped and asked why she was walking alone at such an hour. She gave no explanation. He offered her a lift to Kikuyu town, and she accepted. But here's what disturbed the driver. The woman appeared completely calm and collected. No tears, no panic, no distress. He dropped her off at Kobel Makutano Junction in Kikuyu. Minutes later, a second taxi driver encountered a woman at the same junction. But this time, she looked completely different. She was now dressed in an abaya, a long, flowing Islamic garment that covered her entire body. The woman asked to be taken to Nairobi. The driver agreed and charged her 1,300 Kenyan shillings, of which she paid 500 up front. She sat in the front passenger seat and appeared very disturbed. The driver asked if she was sick. She replied that she was, but had her medication with her. She urged him to rush her to Nairobi because she was meeting someone. Then something terrifying happened. As they reached Kino area, the driver heard a clicking sound next to the woman. Click, click, click. His mind raced to the worst possible conclusion. He thought she was carrying a ticking bomb. Then something terrifying happened. As they reached Kino area, the driver heard a clicking sound next to the woman. Click, click, click. His mind raced to the worst possible conclusion. He thought she was carrying a ticking bomb. But the question remained, what was that clicking sound? And why did a woman who claimed to have just been carjacked change her clothes twice in less than 30 minutes? But the question remained, what was that clicking sound? And why did a woman who claimed to have just been carjacked change her clothes twice in less than 30 minutes? Sheila claimed she had just arrived from the United States via Uganda on April 14th using MASH Bus Company services. She said Leonard picked her up from the Ambassador Hotel in Nairobi, and they were driving home when they were carjacked at Kino. 2 men entered their car. An argument erupted. There was a loud bang. The car went off the road. She woke up with her door open, unbuckled her seatbelt, and ran to safety. It was a compelling story, but investigators immediately noticed problems. They examined her passport. There was no entry stamp from Uganda or any country showing she entered Kenya on April 14th. They contacted MASH Bus Company. Records confirmed that Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge had not traveled on their buses in April 2014. Her entire arrival story was fabricated. Then, investigators found something even more disturbing inside the crashed RAV4, an identification card belonging to another woman, placed inside a purse. On April 17, 2014, Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge was formally arrested and charged with 1 count of murder. On April 17, 2014, Dr. Johansen Oduor, Kenya's government pathologist, conducted a post-mortem examination on Leonard Kibinge's body. What he discovered would prove crucial to the prosecution's case. Leonard had sustained 3 gunshot wounds. The first entered the back of his head. The second penetrated the back of his neck. The third struck the left side of his chest. All 3 wounds showed burn marks and powder residue. Dr. Odoor's conclusion was unequivocal. The shooting occurred at point-blank range. The pathologist noted something even more significant. Based on the trajectory of the wounds and the victim's position in the driver's seat, the assailant who shot Leonard must have been sitting inside the vehicle, not outside. This contradicted Sheila's claim that carjackers attacked from outside the vehicle. If the killer was inside the car, sitting close enough to shoot Leonard 3 times at point-blank range, they were someone he knew, someone he trusted, someone who had been invited into his vehicle. A ballistics expert from the Kenya Criminal Investigation Department examined the evidence recovered from the scene: 3 live rounds and 3 spent cartridges. His findings were definitive. All 3 spent cartridges were fired from the same weapon. The gun had never been recovered, but investigators now knew that a single firearm had been used to kill Leonard Kibinge. But what about those 3 live bullets found at the scene? The ballistics expert offered a chilling explanation. If the gun had malfunctioned during the shooting, and someone inexperienced with firearms had repeatedly cocked the weapon, unfired bullets could have been ejected from the chamber. This suggested the shooter wasn't a professional hitman, but rather someone unfamiliar with how guns operated, someone who panicked, someone who made mistakes. Perhaps the most damning element of the investigation wasn't what Sheila said, but what she wore. 3 different witnesses saw Sheila Kibinge in 3 completely different outfits within a 30-minute window. The first taxi driver saw her in trousers and a top at 3 a.m. The second taxi driver saw her in an abaya or buoy by 3:15 a.m. And the duty officer at Central Police Station saw her in a long checked dress at 3:30 a.m.
Where did she change? How did she have access to multiple outfits if she had just fled a carjacking? And most importantly, why would someone who had just witnessed their husband's murder take time to change clothes multiple times before reporting the crime? Prosecutors would later argue these wardrobe changes were a deliberate attempt to confuse witnesses and establish a false timeline. But Sheila's defense would offer a very different explanation. Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge's trial began in the Kenya High Court before Justice Jesse Lesiot. Sheila pleaded not guilty. The prosecution called 15 witnesses and built their entire case on circumstantial evidence. There were no eyewitnesses to the murder. The murder weapon was never found. But the web of inconsistencies in Sheila's story would prove devastating. The lead investigating officer testified about the 5 critical inconsistencies that destroyed Sheila's credibility. First, the false travel alibi. Sheila claimed she arrived from the U.S. via Uganda using MASH Bus Company, but her passport had no entry stamp, and bus company records proved she never traveled with them in April 2014. Second, the bypassing of Kikuyu police station. After allegedly witnessing her husband's murder, Sheila bypassed a police station just 500 meters from the crime scene and traveled 20 kilometers to Central Police Station in Nairobi. The prosecution argued this was an attempt to buy time and delay investigations she knew would follow. Third, the clothing changes. 3 witnesses saw her in 3 different outfits: trousers and top, abaya, checked dress, within 30 minutes. Fourth, the mysterious clicking sound that terrified the second taxi driver. And fifth, her behavior at the scene. Sheila admitted to being in the car when Leonard was shot, yet claimed she heard a blast, saw the car veer off, and simply walked away without checking on her dying husband. But why would Sheila Kibinge murder her husband? The prosecution presented a motive rooted in greed and financial dispute. The couple owned valuable rental properties in Mombasa. In February 2014, they received a demand letter from Kenya Housing Finance regarding one of these properties. Leonard had sold the property, but questions arose about the actual amount realized from the sale. Who controlled the money? The prosecution argued that this property dispute, worth substantial sums in rental income and property value, provided Sheila with a powerful financial motive to eliminate her husband. But there was something else. After Leonard's death, court documents would reveal that 3 other individuals came forward, claiming to be Leonard's widow and son. They had already been granted authority to manage Leonard's estate in 2018, while Sheila was still convicted and imprisoned. Was Leonard living a double life? Did he have another family Sheila didn't know about? Or were these opportunistic claims on a dead man's property? The answer would remain murky, but it painted a picture of a marriage far more complicated than it appeared. Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge maintained her innocence throughout the trial. Her defense presented a detailed account of the night in question that contradicted every element of the prosecution's case. According to Sheila, she had asked her daughter to inform Leonard that she was waiting at the Ambassador Hotel in Nairobi after arriving from the United States. Leonard picked her up, and they drove toward their home in Gitaru. Exhausted from travel, she fell asleep in the passenger seat. She claimed she woke up at Kino, a location between Nairobi and Gitaru, where Leonard was speaking with 2 men. One man got into the back seat of their vehicle, another followed in a white car. An argument erupted. The man in the back seat demanded her phone, handbag, and more money. Then came a massive bang. The car went off the road and crashed. Sheila claimed her door flew open. She unbuckled her seatbelt, fell out of the vehicle, and ran for her life to seek safety. As for the clicking sound that terrified the second taxi driver, Sheila explained, it was simply her belt buckle as she retrieved money to pay the fare. And her passport? Sheila insisted she had traveled with U.S. documents that contained the entry stamps, but she left them in the crashed vehicle when she fled in terror. She produced airline itinerary forms as evidence of her travel patterns, but they were dated April and August 2013, not 2014. She presented immigration forms for Leonard's green card application, but they were largely blank and unfilled. Sheila insisted she and Leonard had no quarrel. In fact, she testified they were planning to live together in the United States once his green card was approved. She was a devoted wife who had just witnessed the horrific murder of her husband by unknown carjackers. But would the judge believe her? On July 28, 2017, more than 3 years after Leonard Kibinge's murder, Justice Jessie Lesiot delivered her verdict. The courtroom was packed with media, family members, and observers waiting to hear whether Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge would walk free or face execution. Justice Lesiot methodically dismantled Sheila's defense. The court ruled that her travel alibi was demonstrably false. Her behavior after the shooting, bypassing nearby police, changing clothes multiple times, showing no concern for her husband, was unnatural and inconsistent with innocence. Most critically, the forensic evidence showed that the gunman was inside the vehicle, not outside. The ballistics report confirmed point-blank range execution. The pathologist's testimony established that someone sitting in close proximity to Leonard, someone in the passenger seat, had shot him 3 times in the head, neck, and chest. Justice Lesiot concluded, the circumstantial evidence leaves no doubt of her guilt. Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge was found guilty of murdering her husband, Leonard Kibinge Kiruri. 4 days later, on August 1, 2017, Sheila was sentenced to death by hanging under Kenyan law. The conviction sent shockwaves across 2 continents. In the United States, the New Jersey State Board of Examiners took immediate action. On July 27, 2017, 1 day before Sheila's conviction, the board voted to suspend her teaching licenses. The formal suspension order was adopted on September 15, 2017. It read, Sheila Kibiru's Teacher of Elementary School, Teacher of Physical Science Certificates of Eligibility, and Supervisor Certificates be suspended, effective immediately. She was ordered to return all certificates within 30 days. Her American dream, the university lectures, the PhD pursuit, the professional credentials she'd worked years to build, vanished overnight. The suspension order contained one glimmer of hope. If she is ever cleared of the crime and gets out of prison, Sheila will be eligible to have the suspension lifted. But as Sheila sat in a Kenyan prison cell awaiting execution, that possibility seemed impossibly remote. Sheila's case attracted significant attention both in Kenya and the United States. Legal experts and human rights advocates questioned whether justice had been served or whether an innocent woman had been convicted based on suspicion alone. The conviction was controversial because it was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. The murder weapon was never recovered. There were no eyewitnesses who saw Sheila pull the trigger. No forensic evidence, no gunpowder residue, no DNA, no fingerprints on bullets directly linked her to the shooting. Critics argued that Sheila's inconsistent story and suspicious behavior, while damning, didn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that she murdered her husband. Could she have been traumatized and in shock? Could her false statements about her arrival date have been attempts to hide something else, perhaps immigration violations, or an extramarital affair rather than murder? Supporters maintained that an educated, accomplished woman with no prior criminal history doesn't suddenly become an execution-style killer over a property dispute. But prosecutors countered that financial motive has driven countless murders throughout history, and Sheila had the most to gain from Leonard's death. And then, nearly 2 years after her conviction, something extraordinary happened. On May 24, 2019, the Court of Appeal in Kenya reviewed Sheila Kibinge's case. 3 appellate judges examined the evidence that had convinced Justice Lesiot of Sheila's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Their conclusion stunned the nation. The Court of Appeal overturned Sheila's conviction and acquitted her of all charges. After spending nearly 2 years in prison under sentence of death, Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge was a free woman. The appellate court determined that the circumstantial evidence, while suspicious, was insufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The woman who had been convicted of execution-style murder and sentenced to hang was now legally innocent, but her ordeal was far from over. After her acquittal, Sheila did something that surprised many observers. She went to court to fight for Leonard's estate. In 2023, 6 years after his death, succession case documents revealed a complex web of competing claims. 3 individuals came forward, claiming to be Leonard's widow and son. They had already been granted authority to manage Leonard's estate back in 2018, while Sheila was still convicted and imprisoned. The dispute involved multiple properties, including the controversial Mombasa flats, with both sides claiming ownership and control of substantial rental income. Was Leonard Kibinge living a double life with a secret family? Were these claims legitimate or opportunistic attempts to seize a dead man's property? The succession case continues, adding yet another layer of mystery to an already complex story. The murder of Leonard Kibinge Kiruri remains one of Kenya's most controversial and debated true crime sagas. Nearly a decade later, fundamental questions remain unanswered. If Sheila didn't kill Leonard, who did? The murder was clearly personal, executed at point-blank range by someone inside the vehicle, someone Leonard trusted enough to allow into his car at 3 a.m. The killer has never been identified. The murder weapon has never been recovered. What was the clicking sound that terrified the taxi driver? Sheila's explanation, a belt buckle, seemed innocuous, but the driver was so disturbed that he went directly to police. Was it something more sinister? Why did Sheila provide false information about her arrival date and travel method? Even if innocent of murder, her lies destroyed her credibility and made conviction almost inevitable. And perhaps most disturbingly, who else claimed to be Leonard's family? Court documents suggest Leonard Kibinge may have been living a double life, with multiple families claiming his estate. Did family secrets contribute to his murder? Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge's story is a haunting reminder of how quickly success can turn to nightmare, how marriages conducted across continents can hide deep secrets, and how the pursuit of justice doesn't always provide clear answers. Was she a cold-blooded killer who planned her husband's execution over a property dispute and nearly got away with it? Or was she a traumatized woman who made terrible decisions in the aftermath of witnessing her husband's murder by unknown carjackers? The appellate court decided the evidence wasn't strong enough to convict. But acquittal is not the same as innocence. Somewhere in Kenya, the truth about what happened that April night in 2014 remains known to very few, perhaps only one person. Leonard Kibinge Kiruri is dead. His killer walks free. And Sheila Wanjiku Kibinge, whether victim or perpetrator, will carry the weight of that night for the rest of her life. This is the story of Sheila Kibinge, a case that divided 2 nations, a verdict that was overturned, and a murder that remains unsolved.